Right, we are live. Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone's having an excellent Wednesday so far. And today we are going to be diving into, as mentioned, Neville's fifth lesson of his 5 lessons, remaining faithful to your idea. Now, for those who may be new to this or are joining after the live, this is basically a breakdown and sort of decoding of Neville's teachings. It's been an ongoing series. I will probably continue to do so, given the feedback that everyone has given me so far. Just having a better understanding altogether by taking Neville's readings, taking his works, and sort of breaking it down into maybe more modern day speak and really having that understanding, because one of the things that are constantly being run into, people are having difficulty with, is having the lack of understanding of what Neville was teaching. Sometimes his words are getting lost in translation, as does often happen and is the case. So I am excited to dive in today. Make sure to grab a pen and paper, take lots and lots of notes. I will be going back and forth between screen sharing and reading through and switching off and sort of, again, breaking down or translating the part that we just went over. This is going to be highlights. I'm not going to be reading word for word the entire thing, but I do have in the description box a link to his 5 lessons. So if you want to read along or if you want to read in your own time, please feel free to do so. And I also have links to the previous 4 lessons if those were missed. All that information is down in the description box. So without further ado, I am excited to dive into this. Let me share my screen. And let's go back up to, let's see here, lesson 5, remaining faithful to your idea. So being the last part, this is going to be sort of like a wrapping up, sort of bringing it all together, so to speak. The last 4 lessons, everything that we've learned, going to be talking more about thinking fourth dimensionally, giving more examples of what that means, which is a question that I often get asked about as well. What does that mean by thinking fourth dimensionally? So a lot of breaking down, and I am excited to help you guys really dig into this. So starting at the top, tonight we have the 5th and last lesson in this course. First, I shall give a short summary of what I had gone before. Then, since so many of you have asked me to elaborate further on lesson 3, I shall give you a few more ideas on thinking fourth dimensionally. Let me, make an adjustment here first. Okay. I know that when a man sees a thing clearly, he can tell it. He can explain it. This past winter in Barbados, a fisherman, whose vocabulary would not encompass 1,000 words, told me more in 5 minutes about the behavior of the dolphin than Shakespeare with his vast vocabulary could have told me, if he did not know the habits of the dolphin. The fisherman told me how the dolphin loves to play on a piece of driftwood. And in order to catch him, you throw the wood out and bait him, as you would bait children, because he likes to pretend he is getting out of the water. As I said, this man's vocabulary was very limited, but he knew his fish and he knew the sea. Because he knew his dolphin, he could tell me all about their habits and how to catch them. When you say you know a thing, but you cannot explain it, I say you do not know it. For when you really know it, you naturally express it. If I should ask you now to define prayer and say to you, how would you, through prayer, go about realizing an objective, any objective? If you can tell me, then you know it. But if you cannot tell me, then you do not know it. When you see it clearly in the mind's eye, the greater you will inspire the words which are necessary to clothe the idea and express it beautifully. And you will express the idea far better than a man with a vast vocabulary, who does not see it as clearly as you do. If you have listened carefully throughout the past 4 days, you know now that the Bible has no reference at all to any persons that ever existed, or to any events that ever occurred upon earth. The authors of the Bible were not writing history, they were writing a great drama of the mind, which they dressed up in the garb of history, and then adapted it to the limited capacity of the uncritical, unthinking masses. You know that every story in the Bible is your story, that when the writers introduce dozens of characters in the same story, they are trying to present you with different attributes of the mind that you may employ. You saw it as I took perhaps a dozen or more stories and interpreted them for you. And he goes on to give another example here of the metaphor, the one of many metaphors of the Bible, but this is all to be taken figuratively. That is to be kept in mind. For instance, many people wonder how Jesus, the most gracious, the most loving man in the world, if he be a man, could say to his mother what he is supposed to have said to her, as recorded in the 2nd chapter of the Gospel of St. John. Jesus is made to say to his mother, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" You and I, who are not yet identified with the ideal we serve, would not make such a statement to our mother. Yet here was the embodiment of love saying to his mother, "Woman, what have I to do with thee? What am I going to do with you?" Your Jesus and your mother is your own consciousness, for consciousness is the cause of all. Therefore, it is the great father-mother of all phenomena. Okay, before I keep going, let me kind of break this down a little bit before we get too far ahead, because I know that was a lot. That was a lot. So in the introduction, Neville is basically, giving a story, an example, the premise of how when you know something, you can very easily explain it. You're not going to have to be overanalyzing. It's not going to be difficult. When you know something, you're able to very clearly define. You're very clearly to give an example of that. When you know it, you can show it. When you don't, you can't. And he's leading into this example, another example in the Bible, to kind of get to the point that he's trying to make about consciousness. And we're about to dive more into human habits. So let's keep going. Just want to make sure to keep everybody on the same page with me, because I know it can get to feel like a lot very quickly. You and I are creatures of habit. We get into the habit of accepting as final the evidence of our senses. Wine is needed for the guests, and my senses tell me that there is no wine. And I, through habit, am about to accept this lack as final. When I remember that my consciousness is the one and only reality. Therefore, if I deny the evidence of my senses and assume the consciousness of having sufficient wine, I have, in a sense, rebuked my mother, or the consciousness which suggested lack. And by assuming the consciousness of having what I desire for my guests, wine is produced in a way we do not know. And he tells a story about a man who shared a story, a man in the audience shared a story with Neville about how this man was standing on the street corner waiting for a streetcar. There was none in sight. So he imagined that instead of being on the street corner, that he was in the church. And he was running late for church service. At that moment, a car stopped in front of him. My friend told the driver his predicament, and the driver said to him, "I'm not going that way, but I will take you there." My friend got into the car and was at the church in time for service. That is applying the law correctly. Non-acceptance, I'm going to highlight this, of the suggestion of lateness. Never accept the suggestion of lack. So in this metaphor, Jesus says to his mother, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" This is the rebuking of consciousness. In this case, the mother being consciousness, or suggesting an example that you are lacking something. Your conscious awareness of the 3D is suggesting lack. We are supposed to rebuke that. We're supposed to not accept that. You're talking back to that. Jesus is talking back to his mother, saying, What am I going to do with you? No, no, we don't accept that. That's essentially what Neville is trying to break down here. Also give an example of the man who was running late for church. And he was standing on the street corner waiting for a streetcar. Even though there was none in sight, he closed his eyes for a moment and imagined that he was already in church. And when he opened his eyes, shortly thereafter, somebody pulled over, picked him up, and he made it to church on time. So that is applying the law correctly, highlighting it again. Non-acceptance of the suggestion of lateness, never accepting the suggestion of lack. In this case, I say to myself, what have I to do with thee? What have I to do with the evidence in my senses? Bring me all the pots and fill them. In other words, I assume that I have wine and all that I desire. Then, my dimensionally greater self inspires in all the thoughts and the actions which aid the embodiment of my assumption. It is not a man saying to a mother, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" It is every man who knows this law, who will say to himself, when his senses suggest lack, "What have I to do with thee? Get behind me." I will never again listen to a voice like that, because if I do, then I am impregnated by the suggestion and I will bear the fruit of lack. This is really, really, really important to note. So I am going to make sure to go over this again so that there is understanding. We know this and we've heard this a million times. But what Neville is saying here in no uncertain terms is that despite the evidence of lack right now, despite the fact that it seems you do not have what you want in the 3D, we do not accept it. That is what denying the evidence of the senses means. That means that you close your eyes or you remove your attention from that evidence of lack and imagine instead that you already have what you want. In the example of Neville running out of wine at his party, instead of accepting the fact in the 3D that there is no wine, he instead imagines that there is plenty more wine for the party. And in a way that he does not consciously know, nobody consciously knows, there will be an inspired action somehow, some way to bring about more wine. So really, it's a point that we hear all the time, but so often forget. So had to reiterate that. But let's continue. We turn to another story in the Gospel of St. Mark where Jesus is hungry. And seeing a fig tree afar off having leaves, he came, if haply he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. And Jesus answered and said unto it, No man eat fruit of thee hereafter forever. And his disciples heard it. And in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. What tree am I blasting? Not a tree on the outside. It is my own consciousness. I am the vine. My consciousness, my I amness, is the great tree. And habit once more suggests emptiness. It suggests barrenness. It suggests 4 months before I can eat. But I cannot wait 4 months. I give myself this powerful suggestion that never again will I even for a moment relive that it will take 4 months to realize my desire. The belief in lack must from this day on be barren and never again reproduce itself in my mind. That's what he means. That's what it means. They saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. This belief in lack must from this day on be barren and never again reproduced itself in my mind. So that awareness of lack, the consciousness of lack, that is the analogy of the fig tree being dried up here. We are no longer allowing ourselves to occupy and entertain the idea that we have to go 4 months for our desire, that we have to wait 4 months for the harvest. It is not a man blasting a tree. Everything in the Bible takes place in the mind of man. The tree, the city, the people, everything. There is not a statement made in the Bible that does not represent some attribute of the human mind. They are all personifications of the mind and not things within the world. Consciousness is the one and only reality. There is no one to whom we can turn after we discover that our own awareness is God. For God is the cause of all, and there is nothing but God. You cannot say that a devil causes some things and God others. Listen to these words. And then he gives many examples from the Bible, many passages from Scripture about this being true. I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut into surrender the bars of iron. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So he's saying, like, we cannot say that, God works in some ways and not in others. We cannot be selective, and which is something that we often do when it comes to these teachings. We believe that the law works for some things, but not for others. We can't do that. I form the light, create the darkness. I make peace and create the evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So he's saying it's all us. It's all us. We cannot turn to an outside cause. We cannot turn to the circumstances and point blame. That's what this means. I am the Lord. There is none else. There is no God beside me. There is no second cause. Read these words carefully. They are not my words. They are the inspired words of men who discovered that consciousness is the only reality. If I am hurt, I am self-hurt. If there is darkness in my world, I created the darkness, and in the gloom and the depression. If there is light and joy, I created the light and the joy. There is no one but this I amness that does all. You cannot find a cause outside of your own consciousness. Your world is a grand mirror, constantly telling you who you are. As you meet people, they tell you by their behavior who you are. Your world is a grand mirror. Everything is you pushed out, is what that means. So this is a point that I want to really take note of, because oftentimes we may tend to overlook that the bad things that happen and give credit to those, as well as the good things. We have a tendency sometimes to only give credit to manifesting the good things or the things that we want. And when something goes in a direction that we don't want, if something goes poorly, we tend to dismiss that as bad luck or some kind of outside cause. And Neville's saying very plainly here that we have to stop doing that. There is only one cause, and that is your I am, your awareness, consciousness. That is God. Let's continue. Your prayers will not be less devout because you turn to your own consciousness for help. I do not think any person in prayer feels more of the joy, the piety, the feeling of adoration than I do when I feel thankful, as I assume the feeling of my wish fulfilled, knowing at the same time it is to myself that I turned. In prayer, you are called to believe that you possess what your reason and your senses deny. See the pattern here? When you pray, believe that you have and you shall receive. The Bible states it in this way. Therefore I say unto you, what things soever ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. So, very, very simply, this is what we must do when we pray. If I hold something against another, be it a belief of sickness, poverty, or anything else, I must lose it and let it go. Not by using words of denial, but by believing him to be what he desires to be. In that way, I completely forgive him. I change my concept of him. I had aught against him, and I forgave him. Complete forgetfulness is forgiveness. If I do not forget, then I have not forgiven. I only forgive something when I truly forget. I can say to you until the end of time, I forgive you. But if every time I see you or think of you, I am reminded of what I held against you, I have not forgiven you at all. Forgiveness is complete forgetfulness. You go to a doctor and he gives you something for your sickness. He is trying to take it from you, so he gives you something in place of it. Give yourself a new concept of self for the old concept. Give up the old concept completely. This needs to be discussed. So, a lot of people ask about forgiveness and what true forgiveness means. And the way that Neville describes it, true forgiveness is forgetfulness. Now, in my experience, it is not the case that you have to have complete amnesia in order to forgive, but you cannot still have attachment to that old concept of this person. If I say I forgive this person for this, and that, for when they were rude to me or this thing, whatever the case, that means that if I truly forgive them, if I genuinely forgive them, then I'm not going to be triggered by that thing that happened every time I see them. When I think about them, I'm not also going to recall all of the bad things or terrible things that happened. Forgiveness is no longer holding on to any of the old self, that old conception of them. We have to be done with it. He's very, very, very clear about this. And this isn't the only place that Neville talks about this. If I hold something against another, be it a belief of sickness and poverty or anything else, I must lose it and let it go. Not by using words of denial, but by believing him to be what he desires to be. So this isn't us trying to convince ourselves. We're not saying, oh, I forgive you, everything's fine, when it isn't fine. And I think everyone has been there before and knows what that feels like. True forgiveness is forgetfulness, or maybe in better words, true forgiveness is no longer holding attachment to the things that happened and all of the old resentments that may have been there once before. But let's continue. A prayer granted implies that something is done in consequence of the prayer which otherwise would not have been done. Therefore, I myself in the spring of action, the directing mind and the one who grants the prayer. Anyone who prays successfully turns within and appropriates the state sought. You have no sacrifice to offer. Do not let anyone tell you that you must struggle and suffer. You need not struggle for the realization of your desire. Read what it says in the Bible. And then he goes on to give more passages from scripture. That's it. Like, you do not need to struggle for the realization. Sing unto the Lord a new song, and his praise from the end of the earth. So, very simply, he's saying, when you pray, you turn within and you imagine that you are now experiencing what you want to be experiencing. That is prayer. That is the art of prayer. Believe that you have it, and ye shall receive it. Oop, where was I? The only acceptable gift is a joyous heart. Come with singing and praise. This is the way to come before the Lord, your own consciousness. Assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, and you have you've brought the only acceptable gift. All states of mind other than that of the wish fulfilled are an abomination. They are superstition and mean nothing. When you come before me, rejoice, because rejoicing implies that something has happened which you desired. Come before me singing, giving praise, and giving thanks. For these states of mind imply acceptance of the state sought. Put yourself in the proper mood, and your own consciousness will embody it. If I could define prayer for anyone and put it as clearly as I could, I would simply say it is the feeling of the wish fulfilled. If you ask, what do you mean by that? I would say, I would feel myself into the situation of the answered prayer, and then I would live and act upon that conviction. I would try to sustain it without effort. That is, I would live and act as though it were already a fact, knowing that as I walk in this fixed attitude, my assumption will harden into fact. Time does not permit me to go any further into the argument that the Bible is not history. But if you have listened attentively to my message these past 4 nights, I do not think you want any more proof that the Bible is not history. Apply what you have heard and you will realize your desires. So, just to note a few things really quick, because I know, again, that was probably a lot. When Neville's saying, the only acceptable gift is a joyous heart, come before the Lord with a joyous heart, sing, praise, what he's talking about there is the state of gratitude. When you feel into that state of the wish fulfilled, when you imagine you want to actually start to genuinely feel as you would if it is already happened. So giving thanks for these things as we would, if we now received the thing that we really wanted, we would give thanks for it. We would be genuine in that feeling. That's what we are after here. That's what we are sought after here. That is prayer. Prayer is essentially going to that end. It's not begging for something on the outside or begging to an outside source to give you something or help you with something. It's the acceptance that it is already yours. It's already done. Continuing on. And now he's going to start going into more on the thinking fourth dimensionally. Sorry. And this is a question that came up often, so definitely get your pens and paper out for this part. And now I have told you before it comes to pass that, when it has come to pass, ye might believe. Many persons, myself included, have observed events before they occurred. That is, before they occurred in this world of 3 dimensions. Since man can observe an event before it occurs in the 3 dimensions of space, then life on Earth proceeds according to plan. And this plan must exist elsewhere, in another dimension, and is slowly moving through our space. If the occurring events were not in this world when they were observed, then to be perfectly logical, they must have been out of this world. And whatever is there to be seen before it occurs here must be predetermined from the point of view of man awake in a 3-dimensional world. Yet the ancient teachers taught us that we could alter the future. I know it's where it gets weird. It's where it gets weird. But we can observe an event in our imagination before something happens. Basically, he's saying that since we have the ability to do that, then it must exist somewhere in another dimension. So basically, well, you'll see what he's getting to, but he's talking about how imagination and using your imagination is thinking 4th dimensionally. Deliberate use of imagination is thinking 4th dimensionally. Therefore, my object in giving this course is to indicate possibilities inherent in man, to show that man can alter his future. But, thus altered, it forms again deterministic sequence starting from the point of interference, a future that will be consistent with the alteration. The most remarkable feature of man's future is its flexibility. The future, although prepared in advance in every detail, has several outcomes. We have, at every moment of our lives, the choice before us, which of several futures we will have. There are two actual outlooks in the world possessed by everyone: a natural focus and a spiritual focus. The ancient teachers called one the carnal mind and the other the mind of Christ. We may differentiate them as ordinary waking consciousness, governed by our senses, and a controlled imagination, governed by desire. So, again, to try to break this down a little bit, he talked about this, I believe, in the lesson 3. There are two minds, there are two outlooks and focuses that everyone possesses. We have the natural focus, which is the one governed by our physical senses. It's our focus in the world, in the day-to-day, in the 3D. And the spiritual focus, or the mind of Christ, and that allows you to encapsulate so much more. So that is governed by your imaginal senses. The natural view confines reality to the moment called now. To the natural view, the past and future are purely imaginary. The spiritual view, on the other hand, sees the contents of time. The past and future are a present whole to the spiritual view. What is mental and subjective to the natural man is concrete and objective to the spiritual man. That last sentence is important. To our natural day-to-day, it may feel like, just imagination, but through the spiritual focus, it's real. What Neville's saying here is that through the spiritual view, your imagination is concrete and objective. The habit of seeing only that which our senses permit renders us totally blind to what otherwise we could see. To cultivate the faculty of seeing the invisible, we should often deliberately disentangle our minds from the evidence of the senses and focus our attention on an invisible state, mentally feeling it and sensing it until it has all the distinctness of reality. Earnest, concentrated thought, focused on a particular direction, shuts out other sensations and causes them to disappear. We only have to concentrate on the state desired in order to see it. So what Neville is saying here is something that is really, really important to note. And once again, this is something that you may have heard, many of us may have heard, but we have to get into a habit of seeing things outside of our present physical senses. Because the question that I always get asked all the time is, how do I just ignore the 3D? How do I just allow myself to imagine when there's so many things going on outside of me that really feel urgent? Well, this is where the practice comes in. We have to begin to practice seeing only what we desire to see in here. The habit of seeing only that which our senses permit renders us totally blind to what otherwise we could see. So because we're so used to using our physical senses, we do not allow ourselves to go anywhere outside of that, even though we have this massive world in our imagination. We have this incredible ability to construct all new scenarios, all new objectives, all new characters. We have that power. But because we are habitual and used to only using and going off of the physical senses, we're blind to what we are capable of doing. That's what Neville's saying here. We must stop being blind to the spiritual sense, through the spiritual mind, which allows us to have and be and do anything that we want. Let's continue. The habit of withdrawing attention from the region of sensation, the habit of taking your attention away from the 3D, basically, and concentrating it on the invisible, develops our spiritual outlook and enables us to penetrate beyond the world of sense and to see that which is invisible. This vision in imagination is completely independent of the natural faculties. Open it and quicken it. Basically, practice doing this. A little practice will convince us that we can, by controlling our imagination, reshape our future in harmony with our desire. Desire is the mainspring of action. We could not move a single finger unless we had a desire to move it. No matter what we do, we follow the desire, which at the moment dominates our minds. When we break a habit, our desire to break it is greater than our desire to continue the habit. So he's saying desire here is everything. Desire is what moves us. We would not be moved if we did not have a desire to do so. The desires which impel us to action are those which hold our attention. A desire is but an awareness of something we lack and need to make our life more enjoyable. Desires always have some personal gain in view. The greater the anticipated gain, the more intense the desire. There's absolutely no unselfish desire. Where there is nothing to gain, there is no desire, and consequently, no action. I think we can all agree with that. The spiritual man speaks to the natural man through the language of desire. The key to progress in life and to the fulfillment of dreams lies in ready obedience to its voice. Unhesitating obedience to its voice is an immediate assumption of the wish fulfilled. To desire a state is to have it. As Pascal has said, you wouldn't have sought me had you not already found me. Man, by assuming the feeling of his wish fulfilled, and then living and acting in this conviction, alters the future in harmony with his assumption. Assumptions awaken what they affirm. As soon as man assumes the feeling of his wish fulfilled, his fourth dimensional self finds ways for the attainment of this end, discovers methods for its realization. And this part's important. I know of no clearer definition of the means by which we realize our desires than to experience in the imagination what we would experience in the flesh were we to achieve our goal. We want to read that, note that over and over again. Experience in imagination what we would experience in the flesh or the 3D were we to achieve our goal. This imaginary experience of the end without acceptance, this imaginary experience of the end with acceptance, that part is important, with acceptance, wills the means. So we're not just imagining the end and then continuing to worry about it. Like, we have to accept that end. Once felt, once imagined, accept that it's done. And that wills the means to materialize. The fourth dimensional self then constructs with its larger outlook the means necessary to realize the accepted end. So in my last video, I talked about inspired action, in which if you haven't seen that video, definitely check it out. But this is essentially what he's highlighting here. Once you have felt in your imagination the fulfillment of that desire, it's already yours. You already have it. And once you reach that point inside, your highest self, fourth dimensional self, God, awareness, whatever you want to call it, constructs the wills and the ways and means in which it is going to unfold for you. And then he's going to start talking about how we go about imagining, how we go about moving into the state of the wish fulfilled. The undisciplined mind finds it finds it difficult to assume a state which is denied by the senses. But here's a technique that makes it easy to call things which are not seen as though they were. That is to encounter an event before it occurs. People have a habit of slighting the importance of simple things. But the simple formula for changing the future was discovered after years of searching and experimenting. The first step in changing the future is desire. That is, define your objective. Know definitively what you want. Secondly, construct an event which you believe you would encounter following the fulfillment of your desire. An event which implies fulfillment of your desire, something which will have the action of self predominant. So basically, like, pick a scene that would occur after you have achieved your goal or received what it is that you want. Thirdly, immobilize the physical body. Induce a condition akin to sleep by imagining that you are sleepy. Lie on a bed or relax in a chair. Then, with eyelids closed and your attention focused on the action you intended to experience in imagination, mentally feel yourself right into the proposed action, imagining all the while that you are actually performing the action here and now. This part's important. You must always participate in the imaginary action, not merely stand back and look on, but feel that you are actually performing the action so that the imaginary sensation is real to you. It is important to always remember that the proposed action must be one which follows the fulfillment of desire. Also, you must feel yourself into the action until it is all the vividness and distinctness of reality. So, I know that this is the part where some people might get a little bit frustrated. Neville talks a lot about SATs and inducing that condition akin to sleep, the state akin to sleep, to aid in this. As I've mentioned many, many times, this is not an absolute requirement to do so. But if your desire is causing and bringing up a lot of resistance within you, if it feels difficult to accept the desired outcome, if it doesn't feel possible or real, this is where SATs can absolutely come in handy. Or at the very least, focusing on getting yourself into that relaxed state first. And the point that he also noted that is really important is when we are in that imaginary act, when we are in that wish-fulfilled state, we want to participate in it. So we're not just watching ourselves doing the task or feeling like we're some kind of observer. Like, we want to actually be doing whatever that is in imagination. You have to put yourself in it. For example, when he talks about the ladder exercise, climbing the ladder, we want to actually be in imagination, physically participating in the action of doing that, not just imagining ourselves like we're imagining that we're climbing a ladder. It's very disconnected when we do that. We want to feel that we are now having the experience that we want to be having in the 3D. That's the important thing to note. That's how we leave impressions. And he goes on to give an example about, if you desire promotion in your office, you would visualize a friend standing before you, put your imaginary hand into his, feel it to be solid and real, and carry on an imaginary conversation with him in harmony with the action. Again, this is where he's really trying to break down thinking fourth dimensionally, which I am also going to make a video talking about this as well, because this is something that does often get overlooked and missed. We're trying too hard to figure this out three-dimensionally. We're thinking three-dimensionally instead of fourth-dimensionally, and that's where we get stuck. But let's continue. You do not visualize yourself at a distance in point of space, at a distance in point of time, being congratulated on your good fortune. Instead, you make elsewhere here and the future now. The future event is a reality now in a dimensionally larger world, and oddly enough, now in a dimensionally larger world is equivalent to here in the ordinary 3 dimensions of space of everyday life. So basically what he's saying here is that you're not fantasizing about something that's going to take place in the future. When we are in the imaginal act, we're not thinking about something that's going to take place someday. What Neville's saying is you need to make that future scenario something that you are experiencing right now. So you are in it right now. To be clear. Desire, physical immobility bordering on sleep, an imaginary action in which, I think that might be a typo, an imaginary action which feelingly predominates here and now are not only important factors in altering the future, but they are also essential conditions in consciously projecting the spiritual self. So yeah, Neville is saying this is important, basically. When the physical body is immobilized and we become possessed of the idea to do something, if we imagine that we are doing it here and now and keep the imaginary action and feeling going right up until sleep ensues, we are likely to awaken out of the physical body to find ourselves in a dimensionally larger world with a dimensionally larger focus and actually doing what we desired and imagined we are doing in the flesh. But whether we awaken it there or not, we are actually performing the action in the 4th-dimensional world and will in the future reenact it here in the 3-dimensional world. So this part I know is probably confusing people. What he's speaking to here is essentially lucid dreaming, or sometimes known as liminal dreaming. When you are imagining so intently, leading right up into sleep, you may awaken in another world entirely. Like that's outside of this 3D world that we're in. But he's saying even if that doesn't happen, if we focus on putting ourselves in that desire, in that state akin to sleep, you will in the future reenact it here in the 3D. Experience has taught me to restrict the imaginary action, to condense the idea which is to be the object of our meditation into a single act, and to reenact it over and over again until it has the feeling of reality. Otherwise, the attention will wander off along an associational track, and hosts of associated images will be presented to our attention. And in a few seconds, they will lead us hundreds of miles away from our objective and point of space. So basically what he's saying here is how he likes to do this is condense it. He condenses the act to something very short, like a couple seconds long, and then he loops it. Otherwise, we're prone to wandering. Our mind is very prone to wandering off. Now, this is where I might slightly disagree with Neville, but I don't think that that is the only way to do it. It can be very helpful for some, but if we are having difficulty in looping a scene, I don't want people to take away that you have to do this and only this. If the scene is longer and feels more natural and real to get into, then from my personal experience, that works just as effectively. If we decide to climb a particular flight of stairs, because that is the likely event to follow the realization of our desire, they restrict the action to just that climbing the flight of stairs. Should the attention wander, bring it back to the task of climbing the stairs, and keep doing so until the imaginary action has all the solidity and distinctness of reality. The idea must be maintained in the field of presentation without any sensible effort on our part. We must, with the minimum of effort, permeate the mind with the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Drowsiness facilitates change because it favors attention without effort. But it must not be pushed to the state of sleep, in which we will no longer be able to control the movements of our attention, but a moderate degree of drowsiness, which we are still able to direct our thoughts. So, to be abundantly clear here, this is where he talks a lot about don't try to force it. Why SATS is so recommended is right here. Drowsiness facilitates change because it favors attention without effort. Because when you are in a drowsy state, when you're in a relaxed state, there will be considerably less effort. There won't be that resistance, that friction, that constant nagging, doubting mind. It's going to feel significantly easier to embody a new state than when we are walking around in our conscious day to day. Experience an imagination with all the distinctness of reality. What would be experienced in the flesh? Were we to achieve our goal, and we shall in time meet it in the flesh as we met it in our imagination. So the reason he talks so much about the tones of reality, let me touch on this really quick. The reason that he emphasized so much the making it real in imagination is because the idea is the subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between something that feels real in imagination and something that feels real in the 3D. It's going to leave an impression. So if I shake hands with somebody in real life and that feels very real for me, like I can replicate that in my imagination. In my imagination, I could also shake somebody's hand and feel like the weight of that hand, like, feel any, like if their hands are cold or warm, like you can get the imaginal senses to give you that distinct realness, just like you can through your physical senses. So we're aiming to replicate the realness of the 3D, but in imagination. Hope that makes sense. I will make a video about that. But this is why he talks so much about repeating it over and over until it feels real for us, because that's when your mind will actually start to will accept it and impress it. If it feels like a fantasy, it won't be accepted. But let's continue. To an assumption, all means which promote its realization are good. It influences the behavior of all, inspiring in all the movements, the actions, and the words which tend to its fulfillment. So here's talking about the power of assumption. To understand how a man molds his future in harmony with this assumption, by simply experiencing in his imagination what he would experience in reality, were he to realize his goal, we must know what we mean by a dimensionally larger world, for it is a dimensionally larger world that we go to alter our future. And this is where he talks a lot about changing it in the 4 dimensions of space. If we want to change the 3D, we have to change the 4D, right? And by that, he means the larger world in imagination. Now, what is that 4th dimension? Is time. A dimension is how we measure something. So we have 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, and here he talks about 4-dimensional. 3-dimensional, though the 3 dimensions that we can use to measure are length, width, and height. In the 4th dimension, it's time. We can use time to measure. So this is where he's just explaining this. He's breaking this down and explaining this. The more dimensions an object has, the more substantial and real it becomes. And then he talks about, okay, here we go. The new quality is changeability. If we bisect a solid, its cross-section will be a surface. By bisecting a surface, we obtain a line. And by bisecting a line, we get a point. This means a point is but a cross-section of a line, which is in turn a cross-section of a surface, which is in turn a cross-section of a solid, which is in turn, if carried to its logical conclusion, a cross-section of a 4-dimensional object. So bisecting, by the way, is just basically dividing in half. So we cannot avoid the inference that all 3-dimensional objects are but cross-sections of 4-dimensional bodies, which means when I meet you, I meet a cross-section of the 4-dimensional you, the 4-dimensional self that is not seen. To see the 4-dimensional self, I must see every cross-section or moment of your life from birth to death, and see them all as coexisting. He's talking about infinite states here. And right, so every moment is but a cross section of the greater fourth dimension. Everything here in the 3D is but a cross section of the 4D, which is infinite. My focus should take in the entire array of sensory impressions which you have experienced on Earth, plus those you might encounter. I should see them, not in order in which they were experienced by you, but as a present whole. Because change is the characteristic of the fourth dimension. I should see them in a state of flux, as a living, animated whole. Now, if we have all this clearly fixed in our minds, what does it mean to us in this three-dimensional world? It means that if we can move along time's length, we can see the future and alter it, if we so desire. This world, which we think is solidly real, is a shadow out of which and beyond which we may at any time pass. It is an abstraction from a more fundamental and dimensionally larger world, a more fundamental world abstracted from a still more fundamentally and dimensionally larger world, and so on to infinity. For the absolute is unattainable by any means or analysis, no matter how many dimensions we add to the world. So he's saying this three-dimensional world is a shadow of the 4D. Just like two-dimensional shadow here in the 3D is a shadow of the 4D. So I know this maybe also feel like a lot to take in, but let me continue. Man can prove the existence of a dimensionally larger world by simply focusing his attention on an invisible state and imagining that he sees and feels it. If he remains concentrated on this state, his present environment will pass away, and he will awaken in a dimensionally larger world where the object of his contemplation will be seen as a concrete, objective reality. So, again, I know that this may feel like a lot. The 4D is your imagination. It's your world that lives in imagination, how you have no limits to any of the things that can be experienced. You have the ability to move through time because there is no time in the 4D. So that is why your imagination, which is the doorway to the fourth dimension, is your greatest power. I have stated that man has at every moment of time the choice before him, which of several futures he will have. But the question arises, how is this possible when the experience of man, awake in the three-dimensional world, are predetermined, as his observation of an event before it occurs implies? This ability to change the future will be seen if we liken the experience of life on Earth to this printed page. Man experiences events on Earth singly and successively in the same way that you are now experiencing the words on this page. Imagine that every word on the page represents a single sensory impression. To get the context, to understand the meaning, you focus your vision on the upper left-hand corner and then move your focus across the page. But suppose on looking at the page with all the printed words, you decide to rearrange them. You could, by rearranging them, tell an entirely different story. In fact, you could tell many different stories. A dream is nothing more than uncontrolled four-dimensional thinking, or the rearrangement of both past and future sensory impressions. Man's dreams of events which are separated in time, fused into. So he talks about dreams here for a bit. Dreams are uncontrolled four-dimensional thinking, basically. And what he's trying to explain here, by using an analogy, is that we can take these impressions and rearrange them. Just like if we took words on a page and rearranged them, we could tell a completely different story. He's saying it's like that for our experience too. We could rearrange what we might perceive as factual and real, or whatever it may look like in one way, we can rearrange it to tell a different story. And he tells a story about one of the dreams that he had. And I will be coming out with a video soon about dreams, by the way. But dreams are basically uncontrolled 4D thinking. And he's saying here that sometimes they can make up a series of events, like 2 different events that don't really have much to do with one another, which is very true. When we have learned to control the movements of our attention in the 4-dimensional world, in here, we shall be able to consciously create circumstances in the 3-dimensional world. We learn this control through the waking dream, where our attention can be maintained without effort. For attention minus effort is indispensable to changing the future. We can, in a controlled waking dream, consciously construct an event which we desire to experience in the 3-dimensional world. The sensory impressions we use to construct our waking dream are present realities, displaced in time or the 4D. All that we do in constructing the waking dream is to select from the vast array of sensory impressions those which, when properly arranged, imply that we have realized our desire. So we're learning to control the movements of our attention in the 4D. When you hear 4th-dimensional world, think your imagination, your inner world. And then we can start to rearrange things as we would like them to appear in 3D, and then they become outpictured as such. With the dream clearly defined, we relax in a chair and induce a state of consciousness akin to sleep. A state which, although bordering on sleep, leaves us in the conscious control of the movements of our attention. Then, we experience in imagination what we would experience in reality, were this waking dream an objective fact. In applying this technique to change the future, it is important to always remember that the only thing which occupies the mind during the waking dream is the waking dream, the predetermined action and sensation which implies the fulfillment of our desire. How the waking dream becomes physical fact is not our concern. Our acceptance of the waking dream as physical reality wills the mean for its fulfillment. So what he's saying here is, when we are focused on imagining that which fulfilled, do not get stuck in how it's going to come about. If what we desire is admission into our favorite school, the scene doesn't need to be like, how do we get the letter of acceptance or the phone call of the right person talking to us? See yourself in the class. See yourself on campus. See yourself, acing your midterm exams. That's 4th-dimensional thinking. That's what we are concerning ourselves with, not the how it's going to come about, not the steps that need to take. We're so easy to get ourselves stuck in figuring it out that we really need to be mindful of that. Let's continue. And then he just goes over once again, sort of step by step, the foundation of prayer or imagining the wish fulfilled. Number 1, define your objective. Know what you want. Number 2, construct an event which you believe you will encounter following the fulfillment of your desire. Something which will have the action of self-predominant. An event which implies you have your desire. Immobilize the physical body and induce a state of consciousness akin to sleep. Then mentally feel yourself right into the proposed action until the single sensation of fulfillment dominates the mind. Imagine that you are actually performing the action here and now, so that you experience in imagination what you would experience in the flesh were you now to realize your goal. Experience has convinced me that this is the easiest way to achieve our goal. However, my own many failures would convict me, or do I imply that I have completely mastered the movements of my attention? But I can, with the ancient teacher, say, this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching for those unto the things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize. So Neville's basically saying here, I ain't perfect. I ain't perfect either. Sometimes I forget to master the movement, or I've completely mastered the movements of my attention, but he is consistently pressing toward the mark for his prize. And again, he's emphasizing the point. A lot of the things that he says are naturally redundant, but they need to be because we need to hear the same things over and over and over again in order for it really start to take hold in our minds. Let's continue. Now you are detached in consciousness from the former state. Oh, he's telling, yeah, here's another story from the Bible, and I am going to be making more videos about interpretations, but you are detached in consciousness from that former state. It was your kid, it was your child. You embodied and expressed it into your world. But now that you have assumed that you are what you want to be, do not look back on your former state and wonder how it will disappear in your world. For if you look back and give attention to it, you are steeping once more that kid in its mother's milk. Do not say to yourself, I wonder if I'm really detached from that state, or I wonder if so and so is true. Give all your attention to the assumption that the thing is so, because all responsibility to make it so is completely removed from your shoulders. You do not have to make it so. It is so. You appropriate what is already fact, and you walk in the assumption that it is, and in a way that you do not know. I do not know. No man knows. It becomes objectified in your world. Do not be concerned with the how, and do not look back on your former state. Simply assume that it is done and suspend reason. Suspend all the arguments of the conscious three-dimensional mind. Your desire is outside of the reach of the three-dimensional mind. Assume you are that which you wish to be. Walk as though you were, and as you remain faithful to your assumption, it will harden into fact. So again, if you have not seen parts 1 through 4, I absolutely recommend going through all 5 now of Neville's 5 lessons, and really the emphasis over and over again. We must be definitive in what we want. We must put ourselves into the feeling of being what we want to be and experience, not fantasizing about it as though we are still separate from it, but actually putting ourselves there in that fourth dimensional space and time. And then do not give it a second thought to that old state, to that old story. Do not concern yourself with the how. Do not concern yourself with how it's going to come about. Do not concern about, what do I need to do in order to make it happen? That responsibility has been completely removed from you, which is awesome because we don't want that responsibility. That is for your greater self, the higher dimensional self, to figure out all the ways and means in which things will come to you. Again, for those who have not yet seen my last video on inspired action, I definitely recommend giving that one a watch as well, because that really, gives more examples and breakdowns of how we do not need to, and we will not know the ways and means of expression. We never will. We don't say to ourselves, am I detached from that state? Or is this instance true? We don't second guess all of that. Once experienced and felt in imagination, it is done for you. And so long as we remain faithful to that new assumption, it must harden into fact. It has to. That is the law. And that is Neville's 5th and final lesson. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope this helped break things down a little bit, but please, by all means, feel free to leave questions down below. If there's anything that you want me to break down a little bit more, let me know your thoughts. I am so, again, grateful to have you here. Take care of yourself. Have an amazing day ahead. Do not forget who you really are. Bye, guys.